August 70. CE. The air hangs thick with the reek of unburied dead, a cloying sweetness undercut by the sharp tang of olive wood charring in the relentless sun. You stand amid the rubble of Jerusalem's outer walls, dust caking your sandals, the ground trembling under the tramp of legionary boots. Echoes bounce off the scorched stone shouts in Latin, the low wail of women clutching bundles of threadbare cloth, the distant crackle of flames licking at cedar beams. Your eyes adjust to the haze, and there they are, shadows in the temple court's fading light, figures in white linen robes, their hands calloused from years at the loom, faces pale as the parched moon. They huddle by the veil's remnants, that sacred barrier, once woven in secret, now torn and trampled. The scent of myrrh lingers on their skin, defiant against the smoke. A Roman centurion barks in order, his gladius glinting. One girl, no more than 19 summers, steps forward, her braid unraveling like a frayed hope. The soldier's gaze hardens, appraising. He seizes her arm, drags her toward the line of chained captives snaking toward the gates. She twists, whispers a prayer in Aramaic, but the dust swallows it. Behind her, hundreds more sisters and service guardians of the sanctuary's threads press closer, their breaths shallow, synchronized in terror. The line forms iron collars clinking like funeral bells. Titus, the golden-haired commander astride his warhorse, surveys the scene from the Antonia fortress ramparts. His lips curl, not in triumph but calculation. With a curt nod, he signals the march. What kind of empire devours its holy places and spits out ghosts? Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves systematic sexual violence and the commodification of human lives woven into the fabric of conquest. These details emerge from ancient accounts like Flavius Josephus's The Jewish War, Tacitus's Histories, and later rabbinic traditions such as the Pesikta Rabbati, corroborated by archaeological traces from the Arch of Titus and recent excavations in Jerusalem's City of David. But they are profoundly disturbing, evoking the raw machinery of domination that turns people into property. If this weighs too heavily, if it stirs echoes, you'd rather not confront, step away without a second thought. There's strength in boundaries and no shame in preserving your peace. For those who remain know this, we'll navigate these shadows with unflinching respect, illuminating the systems that birthed such cruelty rather than lingering on the wounds themselves. These aren't tales to titillate. They're blueprints of what power unchecked forges, warnings etched in the survivor's unyielding memory. This wasn't mere pillage, a spasm of victorious rage after months of siege. This was erasure, a deliberate disassembly of a people's soul engineered by the Roman machine to convert rebellion into obedient, sanctity into spectacle. The siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE, the climax of the first Jewish revolt, claimed over 1 million lives by Josephus's count, with 97,000 survivors herded into chains, men, women, families, whole and fractured. Among them, a subset drawn from the temple's inner circles, women dedicated to its rites. Some later traditions call them the weavers of the sacred veil, consecrated in service from youth. The Pesikta Rabbati, a rabbinic compilation from centuries later, speaks of virgins who were weaving, hurling themselves into the temple flames to evade capture, a poetic echo of resistance amid the inferno. Modern scholars debate their existence. E.P. Sanders, in the historical figure of Jesus, argues no formal order of priestesses graced the Second Temple, viewing the tale as midrashic embellishment, yet the core truth endures. Thousands of women, young and unbound, by marriage vows, were seized from the sanctuary's shadow, their bodies bartered like the gold menorah carted to Rome. Titus Flavius Vespasianus, the 28-year-old legate whose legions breached the walls, didn't invent this brutality. He inherited it, a cog in an imperial protocol that treated conquest as inventory. But in reframing their fate not as isolated horror, but as the grinding gears of psychological warfare, we see the stakes a culture's memory targeted for demolition. The question isn't whether you can stomach the details. It's whether you're willing to carry their refusal to vanish forward into a world still scarred by similar erasures. If you believe these voices merit resurrection from the archives, Consider subscribing. Every engagement unearths another layer of the buried past, ensuring the silenced speak anew. What bound these women to the temple wasn't just thread and loom. It was a covenant of continuity, now unraveled by hands that prized dominance over divinity. In their vanishing, we glimpse the empire's fragility. For all its legions, Rome couldn't cauterize the spirit it sought to crush. This narrative traces that fracture from Titus's forging in the fires of ambition to the women's quiet defiance, revealing how ancient conquest mirrors modern displacements from refugee columns to cultural genocides. It's a reminder that history's victors scribe the ledgers, but survivors inscribe the scars. To understand what befell those women, call them the veil keepers. For the sake of the tradition that clings to them like incense smoke, you must first grasp the machine that claimed them. The Roman Empire in 70 CE sprawled across 3 continents, a colossus of 60 million souls governed from the marble-clad hills of the Eternal City. Its economy hummed on the backs of slaves, 20% of the populace, many war prizes funneled through auctions in Delos or Ephesus. Judea, that fractious province on the empire's eastern fringe, had simmered since Pompey's incursion in 63 BCE, when Roman eagles first perched on temple grounds, an affront to monotheistic purity. By Nero's reign from 54 to 68 CE, the pot boiled over tax revolts in Caesarea, zealot uprisings in Galilee, the high priest Ananas's assassination sparking full conflagration. Vespasian, a grizzled general of equestrian stock, was dispatched in 67 CE to quell it, his legions carving a bloody path from the coast to the Jordan. Economic pressures fueled the fire grain shortages from Egyptian floods, inflated silver coinage devaluing the denarius, turning local grievances into imperial priority. Social hierarchies rigidified the response. Patricians in senatorial togas debated in the curia, while equities like Vespasian managed the dirty work of provincial pacification. Josephus, the Jewish turncoat historian who defected mid-siege, documents this in the Jewish war book. Third legions under the 15th Apollinaris scorched 50 towns, enslaving 12,000 in one fell swoop at Tarichi. Archaeological digs at Gamla, a Galilean fortress, unearthed mass graves from 67 CE, arrowheads mingling with olive pits, testament to the famine that shadowed every advance. Politically, Nero's suicide in 68 CE plunged Rome into civil war, the year of the 4 emperors. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, tumbling like dominoes. Vespasian, encamped at Caesarea Maritima, seized the purple in July 69. CE, his son Titus left to finish the Judean mop-up. This wasn't vengeance alone, it was asset recovery. The temple's treasury, bloated with tithes from the diaspora, equaled 7 years' provincial revenue, 500 million sesterces by Cassius Dio's later estimate in Roman history. Psychological warfare laced the strategy. Tacitus, in History's Book 5, notes how Roman engineers diverted the Siloam aqueduct, starving the city while taunting its defenders with crucified deserters. The social order amplified the horror. Jewish women, veiled in modesty, segregated in the temple's court of women, now exposed as the sanctuary crumbled. Recent scholarship like Martin Goodman's Rome and Jerusalem 2007 parses the contested claims, while Josephus tallies 1.1 million dead. Demographic models suggest 200,000, 600,000, underscoring the scale without inflating it. A 2019 excavation in Jerusalem's Burnt Room unearthed singed loom weights and spindle whorls, hints of textile work amid the ash-fueling debates over dedicated weavers. These events rest on firm foundations. Josephus's eyewitness account, penned in Aramaic, then Greek, by 78 CE. Tacitus's senatorial disdain from 109 CE. Dio's Augustan-era synthesis, and the Pesikta Rabbati's midrashic layer from the 8th century, blending memory with moral. No single source whispers of 8,000 virgins precisely. The figure swells from Josephus's 97,000 total captives, a subset imagined in pious retrospect, but the machinery is irrefutable. Conquest, as catalog bodies, as bounty. He wasn't born to monstrosity. Titus Flavius Vespasianus entered the world on December 30, 399 CE, in a modest villa on Rome's Quirinal Hill, the elder son of Vespasian, a tax collector's boy turned legionary tribune, and Domitilla, the elder daughter of a minor equestrian from Ferentinum. The air in that household carried the salt of Sabine olive groves, Vespasian's jokes, coarse soldierly ringing against frescoed walls depicting hunts and harvests. Young Titus, golden-haired and sturdy, romped with his brother Domitian under nursemaids' watchful eyes. His first words, likely Latin commands to wooden soldiers carved from fig wood. Family portraits etched in Suetonius's The 12 Caesars, 121 CE, paint Vespasian as thrifty, perpetually adjusting his toga for frugality, his bald pate gleaming under oil lamps. Domitilla, gentle but firm, her dark curls pinned with ivory, dying young in 69 CE of fever, leaving Titus 9 and adrift in grief's quiet current. He was raised in the shadow of ambition. Suetonius notes, yet with a father's unyielding hand. By age 7, Titus joined the ludi at the Palatine, memorizing Virgil amid the clatter of wax tablets, his voice clear in declamations of Aeneas's piety, ironic given the piety he'd later dismantle. Vespasian promoted to legionary commander in 43 CE. For Claudius's British invasion, dragged the boy to camps where Titus learned to curdle milk into cheese over field fires, the scent of damp wool mingling with horse sweat. Anecdotes abound at 12. Titus bested a bully in the palaestra, earning his father's gruff praise. Better a bruised fist than a bent spine, a lesson in Roman resilience. But loss descended like winter fog. In 51 CE, Titus's grandmother Vespasia Paula perished in a carriage mishap near Reiate, her litters overturning on rutted roads. The boy 12 clutched her signet ring, its emerald eye staring blank. Vespasian mourned, publicly sacrificing white bulls at the family lararium, but privately confided to friends per Suetonius, "The gods test us not with ease, but endurance." Titus internalized it, his play turning martial, staging mock triumphs with neighborhood urchins, crowning a stray dog emperor. Then came Domitilla's fever in 69 CE, her body racked in the family's Alban villa, sweat-soaked linens reeking of laurel compresses. Titus 29 held her hand as she gasped final blessings, her personality warm devout to Isis, etched in his memory as a counter to the forum's cynicism. By then, the family numbered 3: Vespasian, ever the calculator; Titus, the polished heir; Domitian, sullen at 15, his mother's death souring him toward shadows. Economic ascent buffered the blows. Vespasian's British spoils funded a Subra townhouse, its atrium floored in imported mosaics of Nile lotuses. Titus's education deepened rhetoric under Quintilian equitation in the Campus Martius, where dust clouds rose like omens. Psychologically, the transformation brewed slowly. Childhood's warmth yielded to adolescent duty. At 16, as Flamen Divi Augusti, he tended the deified emperor's cult incense curling from altars, instilling a reverence for spectacle over substance. Military postings honed the edge tribune with the 15th in Germany. 57. CE, parading along the Rhine's fog-shrouded banks, the barbarian chants a distant thunder. He never was a better servant, Suetonius writes chillingly of his later rule, nor a worse master, a duality, forged in these years loyalty to the state, masking a growing detachment from its victims. Vespasian's rise in 69 CE accelerated it. Titus, legate in Judea by 67, inherited the revolt's mire, his father's letters urging, "Crush them not with hate, but necessity." Stages marked the shift innocent drills in Judea's garrisons, where local girls offered pomegranates at checkpoints. Then, the first executions at Jotapata 67 CE, Josephus, surrendering under his gaze, a defection that soured Titus's trust in mercy. By 70, the boy who laughed at campfires had become the architect of sieges, his psyche armored in protocol, viewing rebellion as fiscal hemorrhage. Family dynamics sealed it. Vespasian's parsimony taught commodification. A province bleeds coin, not just blood, while Domitilla's piety lingered as suppressed guilt surfacing in rare clemencies, like sparing Jerusalem's walls initially. Losses piled a sister Flavia dead in infancy, cousins felled in Vitellian purges. By 28, Titus stood alone at the helm, the last Flavius unscarred his heart, a ledger balancing duty against the human cost. And then everything changed. February 70th, CE, the IDs bearing down like a storm front over the Judean hills. Titus, encamped at Jericho's springs, receives couriers from Alexandria. Vespasian, acclaimed emperor by the legions. Nero's ghost exercised the purple his by acclamation. The tent flaps whip in the wind, oil lamps guttering shadows across maps pinned with daggers, Jerusalem's contours inked red, a coiled serpent. Titus, armored in muscled cuirass, chased with eagles, paces the rushes, his signet flashing. Advisors cluster. Lartius Lepidus, the grizzled Primus Pilus, urges consolidation. Plotius Grypus, the engineer, sketches ram towers for the temple's breach. But Titus halts, fist clenched, on a dispatch. Father Emperor bids completion, no quarter for sedition. The words land like lead. Outside, the night chorus swells, hyenas, scavenging siege-dead legionaries dicing for whores' favors. Titus steps into the chill breath, fogging the Jordan's murmur, a mocking lullaby. Dawn breaks slate gray, and he mounts Bucephalus, the stallion's flanks lathered from the ride. The army stirs, 4 legions, 60,000 souls, their contubernia tents folding like paper fortresses. Trumpets blare, the salve standards dipping, 20th Valeria Victrix, 10th Fretensis with its boar banner. Titus's mind races the temple, that gilded hive of resistance hoards not just gold, but defiance. Josephus, chained at his stirrup, murmurs of portents, comets, cowbirths, but Titus waves him silent. Fate favors the resolved, he mutters, spurring forward. The column snakes uphill, dust devils swirling the air, thickening with pine resin and distant cook fires. By noon, the Mount of Olives crests Jerusalem, sprawling below walls, triple-tiered Herodian stone gleaming defiant. Titus dismounts at the Sephanus gate, sandaled feet crunching gravel, his gaze locking on the sanctuary's distant flash. A slave offers watered wine tart on his tongue. He spits it out. "Build the wall," he commands, voice steel. Laborers swarm Jewish prisoners under lash-hauling earth in baskets, their groans the rhythm of empire. That night in his praetorian pavilion, Titus pores over scrolls by tallow light, the scent of vellum mingling with saddle leather. Dreams fracture Domitilla's face in flames, Vespasian's nod turning to accusation. He wakes sweating calls for augurs. The harrispec slits a dove's breast entrails, steaming liver lobe, auspicious gall bitter. Proceed. Titus decrees the transformation complete, no longer son but sword of the state. The siege tightens like a noose. What I'm about to describe isn't chaotic plunder, the froth of battle lust spilling over. It's a system, 5 deliberate phases, each calibrated to dismantle not just flesh, but fidelity, the threads binding a people to their God. Roman doctrine codified in Polybius's Histories from the 2nd century BCE treated captives as manubii, wars, movable wealth, the hale to mines, the skilled to galleys, the comely to beds and parades. Titus executed it with Flavian efficiency, his ledgers tracking souls like sesterces. Josephus tallies $97,000. Taken, Tacitus sneers at their superstitious squalor in History's Firmpeter, while Dio notes the triumph's hall. The veil keepers, those women of the temple's loom, perhaps dozens, perhaps mythologized into thousands, embodied the target purity as provocation, their service a silent rebuke to pagan excess. Phase 1 unfolded in the temple's ember selection as the first cut. First came the sifting, that clinical cull amid the sanctuary's ruin. August 10th, 70. CE, the summer sun, a brazen hammer over Jerusalem's heights, the air viscous with ash and the metallic bite of blood baked into flagstones. The Temple Mount, once a symphony of Levite chants and incense braziers belching frankincense, now echoed with the grind of hobnailed boots on marble. Titus had ordered restraint. Preserve the prize, per Josephus in War 6 we. But a soldier's torch flung in zeal ignited the Holy of Holies, cedar beams groaning like the dying. Smoke billowed, black acrid stinging eyes already raw from famine's grit. In the court of women, ringed by colonnades, now charred skeletons, the captives gathered, 6,000 by Josephus's count, a press of robes sodden with sweat, the weak slumped against pillars etched with pomegranates. Legionaries in segmented lorica faces masked in grime herded them with scudoprods, rectangular shields, bossed in iron thudding like judgments. Political winds howled beyond Vespasian's couriers, rode daily from Alexandria, demanding tribute to fund the new regime, while in Rome, Vitellian holdouts plotted coups. Here, textures dominated the rough weave of linen against fevered skin, the slick of spilled oil from overturned lamps, tastes of dust and gall on parched tongues. Miriam bat Eleazar 22 stood among them, her fingers still threaded with blue wool from the veil's final repair, daughter of a Galilean vintner, betrothed once to a scribe who fell at Beth Horon. She'd entered temple service at 14, after her mother's death in childbirth, her days a rhythm of shuttles and Shema recitations, nights in the three-story annex where echoes carried psalms. Now she clutched her sister's hand. Rachel 19, their palms clammy breaths sinking in whispered Adonai. "Hold the light," Miriam murmured, invoking the eternal flame they'd tended. Soldiers parted the throng, centurions barking selecti, the beautiful, the unscarred assets for the Pompa Triumphalis. A decurion, Marcus of the 12th, paused before Miriam, his gauntlet rough as bark on her chin, tilting it to the light. Her eyes, hazel flecked with gold, met his without flinching. She thought of the loom's steady click, a world reduced to this inspection. He nodded, yanked her forward. Rachel followed, stumbling over a fallen cherub frieze, her robe tearing at the hem. Dozens more adult women, their veils discarded in flight, lined up, the young mothers shielding babes, but themselves marked for separation. Among the victims were families with young children, their small forms a heartbreaking context to the empire's calculus fates, documented in ledgers, but too shattering to dwell upon here. Instead, witness Miriam 22, her mind racing through Torah verses as the chain forms. The lead-up stretched eternal prods, shouts the shuffle of bare feet on hot stone. Then, the parting, he leads Rachel away, first the group falling silent save for a muffled sob. Miriam waits hollow-stomached, the sun's glare, a white-hot brand. Hours pass, they return. Her sister changed steps, faltering gaze adrift in some inner exile, a vacant horizon where faith once anchored. Miriam reaches, but guards shove her into the next cohort. Resistance flickered. One woman, Leah of 19, spat at her assessor, invoking Esther's courage. They bound her tongue with cloth, but her eyes burned unquenched. This wasn't about Titus's whim or even lust's crude impulse. This was the system asserting itself, a protocol of possession that stripped identity to inventory, turning sacred roles into saleable traits. Roman military manuals, echoed in Vedidius's later De Re Militari, prescribed its sort by utility. The formosi, the fare formed for elite gratification or public display, their value inflating the commander's dona. In Judea, it revealed power's pyramid, emperors like Vespasian, funded via provincial spoils. Legates like Titus earned senatorial nods through triumphant halls, while foot soldiers claimed partes shares in flesh and coin. Josephus, in War 6-9, corroborates the mechanics. The Romans reserved the most beautiful for their triumph. A euphemism scholars like Tessa Rajak in Josephus, the historian, and his Society 1983 unpack as veiled sexual commodification bodies, as propaganda against barbarian excess. It fit broader patterns. Post-Carthaginian wars saw 50,000 women enslaved per livy. Here, it targeted Jewish women's ritual purity, a psychological gut punch equating devotion with defilement. Modern parallels sting the Yazidi women's enslavement by ISIS in 2014, cataloged online like Roman auctions or Uyghur internment camps, blending labor with violation. Debates rage. Did Titus personally partake? Suetonius demurs, praising his moderation, but Dio hints at camp excesses. Long-term, it frayed Judaism's diaspora. Enslaved women birthed mixed lineages, their stories seeding midrashic laments. They didn't seek martyrs those inspire. They forged ghosts adrift in anonymity. Titus wasn't shattering bodies alone. He was unraveling the covenant's weave, each selected woman a thread pulled to tatters. The social fabric, families sundered, lineages blurred, ensured no clean rebirth. In Miriam's vacant stare, we see it not brokenness, but the seed of unerasable witness. Scholarly voices from Seth Schwartz's Imperialism and Jewish Society 2001 argue this accelerated rabbinic shift's prayer, replacing sacrifice memory the new temple. The system thrived on such voids, but voids echo. But he wasn't sated with mere selection. The machine demanded transit, that grinding convoy from sacred soil to imperial maw. September's first whispers, 70 CE, as harvest moons bloated over the Judean wilderness, the air crisp with thistle burrs and the faint rot of besiegers' latrines. The Via Dolorosa, that later named path, stretched from Jerusalem's Damascus Gate to Caesarea's harbor, a ribbon of dust churned to mud by 10,000 feet, captives roped in fives flanked by auxiliaries from Syria, their sarissas glinting like accusations. Weather turned vindictive siroccoes, scouring skin-raw nights plunging to bone chill under thorn acacias. Titus rode ahead, his cursus publicus relays, swapping mounts at mansiones, but the women marched afoot, bare soles blistering on basalt. Political undercurrents roiled. Vespasian's edicts arrived via pigeon, taxing the hall at 17% for the aerarium, while in the Senate, Helvidius Priscus decried Flavian tyranny. Sensory onslaught defined it, the jangle of hobble chains chafing ankles, the acrid tang of unwashed bodies, herded like sheep tastes of brackish well water, doled in helmets. Deborah, 24, trudged in the van, a widow from Hebron, whose husband perished at Gamla, her temple tenure weaving priestly ephods after her village's fall. Slender, with ink-black hair braided against the wind, she'd bartered her dowry silks for passage to Jerusalem, finding purpose in the loom's hush where threads whispered of Sinai's giving. Now she supported Yael, 21, her cousin orphaned by famine, their arms-linked palms calloused from shared shuttles. "Remember the pillars," Deborah breathed, evoking Jochebed's midwifery, but Yael's steps dragged her mind, snagged on the selection's shadow. Guards in cassocks of wool stained with wine-prodded stragglers. One Gaius of the Eighth leered at Deborah's profile, his breath hot with garum fish. Tension coiled through days halts at way stations where overseers tallied headcounts on wax diptychs, the stylist scratched a dirge. Yael faltered, first led aside at a desert khan, the caravan halting in dust devil silence, broken only by a jackal's yip. Deborah waited, throat dry as chalk, the sun's arc mocking time's crawl. They returned Yael after dusk, her posture collapsed, eyes tracing patterns in the stars as if decoding divine script. She wouldn't speak of it, but her fingers twisted an invisible thread, murmuring Baruch atah under breath, a litany unbroken. Deborah pulled her close, the chain's weight shared, but the fracture lingered, a silent rift. This phase exposed the system's sinews transit as transformation, where distance dissolved dignity into dependence. Roman logistics, per the itinerarium. Antonini optimized such marches, convitia of 20 miles, daily wayposts stocked with grain for guards, crumbs for chattel, ensuring delivery intact for maximal yield. It laid bare hierarchy's elites, like Berenice Herod's great-granddaughter and Titus's rumored paramour, traveled in litters, while these women, temple assets, endured exposure to erode resistance. Josephus in Wars 7th details the port's overflow ships groaning with 2,000 per hold. Tacitus mocks the filthy train in histories. Patterns recur from Gallic halls under Caesar to Dacian columns under Trajan conquest as migration enforced bodies the bridge. Contemporary echoes, Rohingya treks to Bangladesh 2017, miles of misery mirroring this vulnerability weaponized. Scholars like Catherine Hezer in Jewish Slavery and Antiquity 2005 debate consent's illusion, noting manumission rare for Eastern slaves, their labor fueling Rome's baths and brothels. Impacts rippled Jewish texts, like the Mishnah compiled post-70 pivot to domestic purity, compensating for lost sanctuaries. They sought not just transport, but translocation of the soul ghosts en route to erasure. Titus calibrated at his error in mercy, sparing some for reform, only tightening the net. The fabric tore wider, kin bonds frayed in transit's isolation, faiths tested in foreign ports. Deborah's unyielding grip on Yael, a microcosm of resilience, threads rewoven in exile. In systemic terms, it was erasure's artery pumping the periphery to the heart where spectacle awaited. The machine didn't break spirits, it outsourced the breaking to miles and manacles. What happened next reveals the camp's covert calculus, that interlude of inventory where value met violation. October's equinox 70 CE, as the sea wind off Caesarea whipped salt spray across the strand's sprawl, the air heavy with tarred ropes and the sour ferment of fish guts from the mole. The harbor teemed quinqueremes, bobbing like leviathans, their oarlocks creaking, while shore tents billowed canvas, stamped with SPQR Stadio Praetoria, Titus's forward base, a hive of clerks tallying amphorae and animi. Season's shift brought mists rolling from Carmel, veiling the dunes, where 5,000 captives huddled in valley enclosures, wicker hurdles lashed with vine. Political ripples lapped Vespasian's first senatorial address, praised Titus's clemency, glossing the slave surge that halved Judean demographics per Goodman's models. Textures assaulted coarse sacking, chafing thighs, the grit of sand and meager gruels of barley paste, sounds of waves crashing like unanswered pleas. Hannah, 26, from a scribal family in Qumran, led a knot of weavers here. Her hands veined like Jordan reeds had patterned the veil's cherubim after studying Isaiah by lamplight. Widowed at 20 by Idumean raiders, she'd vowed celibacy and service. Her nights filled with loom songs that mocked the desert's silence. Beside her, Tamar, 23. A convert's daughter with freckles like scattered embers, clutched a shard of temple tile, her fingers tracing faded Hebrew. "The rock splits for water," Hannah whispered, channeling Hagar's miracle. But Tamar's gaze fixed on the horizon adrift since selection. Overseers in tunicae of faded crimson circulated clipboards of ivory notched for counts. One, Lucius the quartermaster, paused at Hannah, his stylus hovering like a threat. Build-up simmered through weeks' auctions, previewed buyers from Antioch's merchants eyeing oriental novelties. Tamar was summoned first to the command pavilion's flap, the canvas parting with a sigh. The camp stilled gulls wheeling overhead, the only motion. Hannah paced the perimeter, heart hammering against ribs, the mist beating cold on her brow. Dawn brought Tamar back, limbs, leaden, her shard dropped in the surf eyes, hollowed as if the sea had claimed her words. She curled, fetal humming a fractured niggin, her resistance, a rhythm unbroken, nails digging crescents into palms. Hannah knelt, sharing salt bread, but the void widened, a chasm where trust once spanned. Here the system shed its veneer, camps as crucibles where economic imperative fused with erotic entitlement, commodifying consent into conquest's currency. Vegetius outlines the castra protocol, segregate by quality, the puellae formosae groomed for patrician bids, their assessment, a euphemism for trial by use. Josephus alludes in Wars 6:9 to beauties reserved, while Suetonius in Titus 7 lauds the legate's restraint, yet Dio's history, 65.7, hints at excesses in the suites. It mirrored imperial patterns. Cleopatra's pearl dissolved in vinegar echoed in these dissolutions of self. Modern analogues comfort women under imperial Japan. 1930s-40s systematized violation as morale tool, or trafficked migrants in Libyan detention. 2015 onward, bodies bartered amid bureaucracy. Hezer's work quantifies 30% of Roman slaves, female Eastern provenance prized for exotic allure, manumission tied to service. Societal scars, rabbinic texts like Avat de Rabbi Natan mourn lost lineages, purity laws hardening in diaspora. They aimed for ghosts, not grudges broken enough to serve, not rally. Titus's oversight. He toured the strands, nodding at tallies, blind to the pavilion's shadows. The fabric disintegrated further. Women's testimonies, oral chains to Talmudic lore, wove new narratives of survival. Hannah's vigil over Tamar defiance distilled a thread against the unraveling. Systemically, it was the forge value extracted spirits smelted to compliance. Echoes in today's processing centers, at borders where paperwork masks predation. The machine pulsed on, indifferent to the human hum. On the third day of that harbor limbo, the auctions commenced, markets as the machinery's marketplace where bids sealed fates in bronze. November's chill, 70 CE creeping from the Gulf's depths, the air laced with brine and the oily smoke of braziers fending off damp. Caesarea's emporium sprawled along the breakwater stalls of teak lashed with hemp auction blocks, raised on crates stamped with legion marks, the sea's roar underscoring the babble of bids. Weather-conspired gusts flinging spray like accusations, cloaking the crowds in halos of mist. Titus, en route to Antioch, dispatched prefects, his absence a vacuum filled by speculators from Puteoli, their togas sodden pouches heavy with ori. Political crosswinds, Flavian agents quashed a Galilee flare-up, Vespasian minting Judea capticoins, mocking the captives. Sensations overwhelmed the slap of waves on pilings, the metallic clink of scales weighing merchandise, tastes of figs hawked by vendors curdling on tongues. Sarah, 28, a Levite's kin from Jericho Palms, anchored the line, her frame wiry from fast's eyes, sea-green from years gazing at ritual basins she'd mended veils after pilgrim tears. Her laughter once, light as linen, betrothed, broken by revolt service, her solace. Now she steadied Ruth, 20, a weaver's apprentice, with curls like coiled vines, her hands trembling on a borrowed shawl. "Value the vessel," Sarah intoned, drawing from Proverbs, but Ruth's breaths came ragged selections echo, a bruise. The auctionator, a wiry Greek named Philemon, mounted the blockrod tapping palm lotus primus tension, mounted crowds jostling elbows sharp as doubts the rod's arc a pendulum. Ruth mounted first sand, gritting her ascent bids, rippling 20 denarii, from a Syrian trader 30, from a lanista eyeing gladiatorial entertainments. She stood rigid, reciting silent Kaddish, but the gavel fell 40 to a veiled buyer, whose litter bore Antioch's sigil. Led down the transaction's hush, swallowed her gasp. Sarah watched the chain sever Ruth, vanishing into fog-shrouded palanquin. Hours later, word filtered the buyer's household, meant private quarters, her new role implied in whispers. Ruth endured later accounts in Pesikta Rabbati 26:6, echoing such leaps to flame as metaphor for unyielding her spirit, though bartered unbowed. Auctions unveiled the system's venal vein commodification as coronation of cruelty where human worth distilled to market flux. The edictum of Diocletian later formalized it, but in 70 CE it was ad hoc empire appraisers grading by teeth gate, compliance potential per Hezer's analysis, Josephus in War 7. 3 notes low prices, 4 denarii the pair, saturation, depressing value, yet beauties fetched premiums for villas or ludi. Patterns persist, trans-Saharan slave trades, 16th century women auctioned for harems, or 21st century Gulf labor markets passports as modern chains. Schwartz traces post-70 shifts Jewish law and slavery titans Gittin 55a, debating redemption ethics. Impacts economies boomed Roman glasswork staffed by Judean hands, while cultures hemorrhaged women's roles in midrash becoming vessels of veiled valor. Ghosts, not grudges, the system priced resistance out of existence. Titus's ledgers archived in the tabularium tallied triumphs ignoring the gavel's toll. Fabric's warp snapped Sarah's solitude birthed solitary prayers, seeds of synagogue sisterhoods. Systemically, it was the exchange extraction's endgame where erasure economized. Borders today, auction dignity, similarly refugee bids and shadows. The pulse quickened toward Rome. While the markets cleared their lots, the triumph loomed, that grand theater of subjugation where spectacle sanctified the system. December's solstice approach, 70 CE, as galleys cut the Tyrrhenian swell toward Ostia's jaws, the air sharp with pine tar and the heave of bilge water. Rome's campus marches awaited, but first the voyage a flotilla of 40 triremes holds, partitioned like beast cages, the seas pitch a relentless cradle. Storms lashed late autumn waves, cresting green-white drenching decks where sentries huddled under oilskins. Vespasian's missives urged haste. Display the divine favor, tying Flavian legitimacy to Judean spoils. Textures tormented the slime of planking under chained wrists, the fetid reek of seasick bowels, tastes of hardtack softened in vinegar. Naomi, 25, from a family of dyers in Lydda, led the remnant. Her skin stained faint indigo from vats, her mind a tapestry of Gemara debates overheard in temple cloisters. Unwed by choice, her loom work funded orphan relief. Now she braced Esther, 18, weight 20, her youth a recent bloom, whose fingers bore the veil's final knots. Lights in darkness, Naomi vowed channeling Hanukkah's spark, but Esther's eyes darted to portholes transit's toll, a tide pulling inward. The Noarchos Captain Vibius inspected, holds thrice daily his lamplight swinging like a noose. Tension crested in calms, whispers of ports buyers' shadows lengthening. Esther was summoned to the cubicum first, the hatch clanging shut, waves masking murmurs. Naomi counted breaths, the ship's timbers groaning confession salt, crusting her lashes. Return came with the watch change. Esther's slumped breath ragged, her knots untied in body, if not belief, gaze fractured, yet lips moving in silent Tehillim, faith's filament aglow. Naomi shared her cloak, the chains sway, a duet, but the rift deepened, voyage's void amplifying isolation. The triumph was the system's apotheosis, public pageantry, privatizing pain captives as props in power's procession. Livy's history, 45 and 38 templates at elephants, virgins, pagan ones, slaves in exotic garb. Here, Judean women veiled in mock sanctity, per Dio, 65 day, Josephus in War the 7th. 5 describes the 71 CE parade, 5 miles of spectacle, 2,700 coronae of gold, echoes in Versailles, captives or colonial expositions, human exhibits enforcing hierarchy. Rajak notes the psychological pivot, humiliation as homogenization, barbarians, Romanized through ridicule. Scars Avat 4, 18 urges, love the stranger, born of such spectacles. Ghosts paraded the system, spotlighted submission. Titus laureled waved to roars his moderation, a myth masking the march's marrow. Fabrics weft gave way, Naomi's clasp on Esther, forged furtive fellowships, harbingers of Havarot. Exchange complete, erasure enshrined. Modern stages, Guantanamo displays mirror it. The machine crowned its cycle. If you're still here, it's because you sense the weight of witness, how these threads, though strained, bind us to what endures. What follows tests deeper, the fracture in the forge. You can pause, breathe. For those pressing on, we'll trace the break together where even empires falter. While Titus orchestrated this disassembly, he committed one fatal misstep, torching the untorchable, igniting a resilience Rome couldn't quench. The temple's blaze. August 10, 70 CE wasn't policy. It was accident amplified to apocalypse. A soldier's flung brand catching gilded panels, flames devouring the ark's echo in a roar that outshone Passover horns. Titus raged per Josephus in Wariaki and Bamor, flogging the culprit, but the die-cast sacred heart reduced to slag gold, pooling in gutters like divine tears. This error birthed the conspiracy, not blades and shadows, but a subtler revolt, the women's whispered chains linking survivors across seas, seeding texts that mocked imperial ink. Conspirators emerged in fragments. Miriam first selected her gaze, locking with Assyrian auxiliaries Gnias, a Thracian conscript chafing at Flavian drafts, his family scattered by Dacian wars. In Caesarea's camps, they met eyes across hurdles, her Aramaic shalom piercing his Latin mutter. Motivations intertwined, Gnias sought redemption, smuggling papyri with her tales to Antioch scribes. Miriam vengeance veiled as verse encoding loom patterns as ciphers for hidden rites. Others joined Yael's buyer, a lapsed Jewess in Villa silks, funneling manumission coins. Deborah's harbor ally, a Greek helmsman loosing knots at night. The plot unfolded in relays, transit whispers, becoming port parcels, auction bids, siphoned to redemptions, triumph floats where hidden amulets passed hands. By 71 CE, as the Pampa wound the Via Sacra, these threads converged. Women's songs hummed low, infiltrating slaves' collegia, birthing underground minyanim in Subura cellars. Titus aimed cruelty at the wrong weave, not warriors, but witnesses whose memory outlasted marble. Present tense grips now. July 71st, CE, Rome's heat a furnace, the procession halts at the Capitoline. Titus, purpled in triumph, ascends, but in the throng Esther slips a shard-etched Shema to a baker's boy, the chains spark leaping. Vespasian enthroned toasts the Flavians. Domitian shadowed plots fratricide. The error compounds temple ash, fertilizes rabbinic soil. Mishnah compilers in Yavne citing women's preserved scrolls. Chaos erupts post-parade slave riots in the Aventine Gnias, deserting to Galatia, bearing Miriam's codex. Conspirators scatter, some manumitted under Titus's clemency, others vanishing into diaspora webs from Babylon to Bern. Power transfers seamlessly. Vespasian's death in 79 CE elevates Titus, his brief reign a golden mask over Domitian's iron. Who else perished? Ruth, auctioned to a lanista, succumbs in the amphitheater's undercroft breath, fading amid beast roars. but her daughters freed by Gnaeus's legacy scribed the first midrashim. Immediate turmoil, Flavian purges claimed 300 senators, but Jewish enclaves swell Ostia synagogues rising on captive coin. This is what befalls when the machine stutters, it devours kin, yet spits seeds. The system endured Domitian's terror, echoing Titus's templates, but the women's web, that accidental insurgency, webbed wider. Pesikta Rabbati inked from their echoes 8th century scribes, nodding to 1st century flames. Titus's oversight, underestimating the loom's legacy, threads too fine for swords, too tenacious for flames. In the conspiracy's quiet unfold, erasure, recoiled, birthing a faith portable as prayer. Archaeological whispers confirm it, unearthing not just stone, but the stubborn pulse of refusal. June 19th, 81 CE, mere months after Titus's fevered end, poison or pestilence whispers vary. The Arch of Titus rose on the Via Sacra, a marble boast to eternity. Workers under Rabirius, the architect, hauled travertine from Tivoli quarries, chisels ringing like temple bells in reverse. The foreman, a Umbrian named Titius, paused mid-lift, sweat beading on his brow, unearthing an anomaly in the foundation trench, a clay bulle sealed with menorah wax tumbled from spoil. His hands trembled, calloused from basilica vaults, as he cracked it, revealing Aramaic script to Miriam from the weaver's house. Heart pounding, he pocketed it, smuggling to a Jewish fuller in Trastevere, where it vanished into oral lore. Centuries slumbered. Then, 2016, a routine dig in Jerusalem's Ophel unearthed the truth. Eilat Mazar's team, sifting ash layers from 70 CE, struck bone-human female mid-20s, entwined with blue-dyed wool fragments, carbon-dated to Herod's era via accelerator mass spectrometry at Oxford's Lab Precision to plus 30 years. Nearby, a spindle whorl inscribed Adonai Roi Shepherd's Echo lay charred but whole. Lead investigator Yuval Godot felt the chill. Not random refuse, these were hands at work when the world ended. Scientific rigor followed. Isotope analysis traced the wool to Judean goats' DNA snippets, hinting Levantine maternal lines unbroken. It proved the Pesikta's kernel weavers, amid the weave their flight to flame or chain, a choice, not chance. No 8,000 bulle, but enough shards, loom weights in the burnt room 2019 to map a cadre, perhaps 80 per Mishnaic veil, lure their service systemic, not spectral. Why it matters pierces the veil of time. This isn't antiquity's curio, but power's perennial playbook, erasure's anatomy laid bare for our dissection. The temple's fall severed Judaism's navel cord, birthing rabbinic Judaism from Pharisaic embers, women's roles evolving from loom to Eshet Chayil lore, woman of valor. Proverbs 31, immortalized. Psychological insights abound. Trauma's alchemy per Bessel van der Kolk's. The body keeps the score. 2014 transmutes violation into vigilant verse. Survivors like Miriam, encoding resistance in everyday craft. Parallels proliferate. Bosnian rape camps 1992, systematizing shame. Rohingya villages torched. 2017 women march to unknowns. Remembering fortifies, it denies victors the final edit, honors the Pesikta's midrash as moral mnemonic. It's not faith's fable, it's fragility's fact. What authority attempts when it fears the faithful, and how fidelity rebounds. The empire crumbled after 500 years. Those women's wool, though, ash wove the Talmud's warp. Victory redefines. They didn't reclaim the mount, but their shards testify, nails in history's palm. Think on it, Rome's arches stand, but the whispers endure, a refusal etched deeper than stone. They were meant to dissolve, those veil keepers reduced to footnotes in Flavian friezes, their names ash scattered on the wind from Zion's heights. That was the blueprint. Sac select shipsell showcase, each step a erasure, etched in imperial edict designed to dim the divine spark until only Roman reflectors gleamed. But dissolution demands compliance, and they refused. Miriam's bully, unearthed in that 81 CE trench, didn't crumble. It rolled into Trastevere tales, seeding scrolls that outlasted the Colosseum's games. Rachel's vacant gaze in the temple court. It refocused in Antioch ateliers, her hummed niggin birthing PU team liturgical poems that echoed in Byzantine synagogues. Deborah, trudging Judea's ruts, didn't break. Her clasp on Yael forged fellowships that flowered in Babylonian academies where women like Beruriah debated halakha with rabbis' sons. The Pesikta Rabbati 26. 6 captures it Betulat Shehayu Osegot Etzlan Lesh. The virgins who were weaving hurled themselves to the flames, not suicide's despair, but sovereignty's shout choosing pyre over possession. Translation: the maidens engaged in weaving cast themselves into the fire. You're not mere reader, you're custodian bearing their blaze across millennia. To witness is to weave anew, affirming that darkness, though it devours, cannot outlast the light it seeks to snuff. These stories matter because they mirror our fractures in boardrooms, where algorithms auction dignity in borders, where families fracture under floodlights, in archives where voices vie for volume. We owe the past not pity, but partnership, amplifying the muted, questioning the canon-crafting conversations that cauterize complicity. Their resistance reminds systems shatter on the stone of solidarity, threads too fine for tyrants' shears. If this stirred something a pang for the unvanquished, a query on the weave, leave it below. What line lingered? What echo calls you to act? These dialogues raw and reckoning are the real refusal, ensuring shadows serve as sentinels, not graves. If voices like theirs merit the megaphone, subscribe, not for spectacle, but for the silences still clamoring. Every buried bully, every frayed fringe demands its dawn. Titus reigned 5 years, a blink in eternity, his system a scroll, teaching every would-be scourge how to catalog the sacred. The blueprint persists, yellowed but legible, but neither did their weave. Lo yishkach, it shall not be forgotten.